afternoon. There are many special interest groups and clubs in Western Australia. Among those is the WA chapter of the Australian Cinema Pioneers. The Cinema Pioneers is an Australian-wide group numbering some 585 members. In Western Australia, we've got about 85 members. And I've got three of them here this afternoon to talk about the good old days in the early West Australian film industry. I'd like to introduce Mr. Eric Nicholls, Mr. Ken Booth, and Mr. Ken Alexander. Firstly, Mr. Nicholls, how many years have you had in the theatre industry?
In excess of 50 years, and of course in the early days of silence, and mostly in Hay Street. I figure that I've spent most of my life. I was also in the film exchanges.
The film exchanges, a bit about those please, Mr. Nicholls.
Well, they had their own exchanges. For instance, Universal were with Optical Photo Supply, and they also had First National Films, and there was Selznick also, but they later went on their own, you know what I mean? They sort of split up and took their own identity.
Right.
And
Fine.
First National, which became Warner Brothers later, they split up, and they had a very big successful and successive stars.
Great. Mr. Booth, what year did you commence working as a projectionist?
I can tell the exact date. It was June the 6th, 1920.
Was that a good date or a bad date?
Oh, a good date. I've enjoyed my life in the cinema.
And how old were you then?
I was 14 and a half.
And that was something that you always aimed for? You wanted to become a projectionist?
No, I got into it by chance. I'd been sent down to the butcher's to get the breakfast meat. I was coming past the theatre, and there was a little crowd of young lads there, and I said, "What's going on here?" And one of them said, "Oh, they want a Spool boy to work here." So I thought, "Oh, this sounds all right." So I bypassed the boys and went straight up to the manager's office. And he played football for Fremantle, and my uncle played in the same team.
Right.
So I thought I'd pull a bit of rank here. I said, "My uncle's Vic Carlson." I said, "I believe you want a Spool boy." He said, "Yes." I said, "What about me?" And I got the job.
And the Spool boy just rewound the movies. Is that what was the role of the Spool boy?
Spool boy, it was a dog's body.
Yeah.
Yes.
One
Right. He did everything the operator didn't want to do.
Mr. Alexander, can you tell us a bit about your start in the industry?
Well, it was 1937 when I started in the industry, and I suppose you could say that I certainly wasn't the original picture show man, but I started on a country film circuit where we used to have one-night stands. We carted portable equipment round, and it was a matter of setting it up every afternoon, doing the show at night, then pulling the gear down and going further to the next town. I stayed for several years on that, and I think it was late 1939 when I joined Hoyts Theatres in Perth, and these two gentlemen were already well established when I went in there, but I was fortunate enough to be working with both of them for the years I was in the industry with Hoyts Theatres.
Right.
We never had any choice in picking the staff in those days, did we?
No.
Unfortunately.
No.
What, you just got what you were given?
Yes.
Yeah, that's why we landed with Ken.
Mr. Nicholls, perhaps you can tell us a bit about the Cinema Pioneers themselves as a group.
Oh, as a group, we meet three or four times a year. We have one this month on the 26th. We have a meeting, and we meet at the entertainment centre. We subscribe a small amount each, and we have a few beers, and it lasts from 4:30 till 7.
Right.
And you meet all your old pals that you worked with, and chaps come up from the country. And we've just received an invitation to go to the Sydney one. There's one in Sydney.
Got it through the mail this week.
Yes.
That's the
Head office.
Head.
Right.
That's
the
just a
Pioneer.
yearly event in Sydney, and
Yeah.
it's quite a large
And
one.
they, I think they're the 21st president goes into the chair this year.
There's a whole list of them, Eric. I couldn't tell you the exact
Yeah, I think
one.
it's the 21st.
And what the Cinema Pioneers as a group have been going for 20 years, 21 years. Have they?
19...
30, early 1930s, I think, wasn't it?
No, what's his name was before that.
Wasn't
Stanley F.
Stanley White, the
Stanley
first
Wright,
president?
Right,
Yeah,
yes.
Stanley Wright.
Mm.
And I think it was much earlier than that. I'm sorry I never brought that.
Well, Stanley Wright was here in Perth in 28.
Yes.
So I should say would be early 30s.
Right.
wouldn't
Yes.
it?
Well, he was 90 when he passed away recently,
Yeah.
and he spent a lifetime in the film
A
industry.
lifetime in the industry.
Yeah.
Mr. Booth, what are some of the aims, besides meeting together with your old workmates of the cinema pioneers?
It's really just a social club.
Just a social
There's
club?
no, there's no object really, except to get together and reminisce and have a good time.
Right.
That's what the board did.
And,
Mr. Nicholls, where was your first job as a projectionist?
my first job as a projectionist was at the Pavilion Theatre.
The Pavilion. Whereabouts was that?
That was in High Street, and about three or four shops this side of Glidden Buildings,
Right.
you know, on the town hall side.
That's right. Fine. How many theatres were in Perth when you started your...
Oh, gee, they're all silent, and I venture to say there'd be about 8 or 9, wouldn't there?
Well, list them, Eric.
Yes.
Prince of Wales,
Prince of Wales, yeah.
Grand,
Yes,
Pavilion,
yeah.
Palladium,
yes.
Majestic,
yeah.
Royal.
Royal, yes.
The Olympia, was that there? then?
Olympia Gardens.
Oh, that was a legit show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Capitol?
No.
No, Capitol was
no,
later.
The Grand. We've
Was there
mentioned the Grand.
anything with the region, the Vic's pictures running there?
Yes, Vic's picture was
And Queen's Hall.
What about the
What-
Britannia?
In what year was this?
You're talking in 1920?
Yeah.
This is about 1920.
Yes.
And they're naturally all the silent movies.
Yeah.
And what was some of the more interesting things about these silent movies? They must have had a certain romance, a certain feeling all of their own.
Oh, yes. I've got a tremendous kick out of screening, and of course, as you can well imagine, in those days, movies were, the entertainment.
Right.
The
And-
opium of the masses. It took the place of religion.
And at Prince of Wales, for instance, on a Saturday night, people had permanent seats booked.
Permanent seats booked?
Yes, and they'd go dressed.
Yeah,
How
they
often
used
were
to
the-
dress for the opening night.
Yes,
Dressed for the opening night? And there was a new movie every week, was there?
yes.
Not at the Prince of Wales.
Not at the print, but then they went to an English show too, didn't
Yeah.
they? So they,
Yes, they used to run long runs, 3 or 4 weeks.
Right.
yes.
Mr. Booth, your earlier years were as a projectionist at the Majestic Theatre in Fremantle and the Capitol in Perth. The Capitol has now been replaced by the Perth Concert Hall, but what were these two old cinemas like?
The Majestic Fremantle was quite modern.
Right.
It was built in 1916 and it was fairly up to date. I think it would seat about 700.
Yes.
It had a balcony, a dress circle and the stalls. It was, for Fremantle, quite modern. The other two cinemas were the Palladium, which was a barn, and they had that scrimp stuff for a ceiling. And the other was the Princess. That had been a fuller's vaudeville house. It was a
Right.
huge place.
Yes.
They had wooden seats, and every time you dropped a seat, you'd go. But it was run by the Greater Union and had all the best movies. And so did the Palladium. The Palladium had Paramount, it was their mainstay, and Princess had all the best of Australasian films. And the Majestic, we were landed with Fox, William Fox, not 20th Century Fox, the old William
Right.
Fox, and Goldwyn Pictures. Now, Goldwyn Pictures were beautifully photographed.
Yes.
That's Sam Goldwyn, who his
Metro
name
Goldwyn,
is
yeah.
mixed up. He never joined MGM,
No,
but
no.
his name is
His name
mixed
is-
up with them.
Yes.
He was a solo on his own, like he finished up on his own too. He had the most beautiful photography in his films,
Right.
beautifully photographed, and good stars. But poor old Fox, Dustin Farnham and June Caprice, she's supposed to have a bit of a liaison with William Fox, I think. That's why she got the part.
Remember
So things
the-
haven't changed. There's a lot of intrigue and gossip even in those days with the stars.
Remember the
Oh,
early,
you'd be surprised.
You'd be
I think it was
surprised.
worse then.
remember the early Goldwyn Follies? That was the Sam Goldwyn stuff that
Oh, yes, that one is later.
were
That
out.
was,
They they were musicals, but they were really the
So
Ziegfeld sort of
Goldwyn
stuff.
Pictures had good stars. He opened up with a roster of legitimate stars from the
Right.
American stage. Maxine Elliott, Jane Cowell, Pauline Fredericks, you remember her?
Yeah.
Really big names. But they only made 1 or 2 movies each, and they found they didn't like the movies
Yeah.
and went back to the legitimate stage. But he carried on with, always had good casts. George Walsh and people like that.
Mr. Nicholls, what was your favourite theatre in the early days?
In the early
Well,
days,
actually, both. In the early days and right up to now.
right up
Oh,
to
there's only
now.
one, isn't there?
Yeah, the Plaza was the one, but the Ambassadors was because I was there at the opening. I was
Right.
one of the original staff.
What was the opening night like at the Ambassadors?
Oh, gee, it was wonderful. You haven't any idea. It was completely sold out, as you can well imagine,
Right.
and it was silent. And we used to have a presentation which consisted of a whole block of stars and equipment that had come from Sydney or Melbourne,
Right.
and it'd be staged. We'd set it up all Friday night, and the show would start Saturday morning.
So you had like a stage production.
20 minutes,
Right.
straight
Right.
after interval, or just prior to interval. And then we had the organ, of course, and
Yes.
the orchestra.
What year was this? What year was the Ambassadors opened?
what did I say?
28.
1928,
And
yes.
of course the Ambassadors has since been demolished.
Yes.
We've got a photo of the stage of the Ambassadors on the monitor now.
Yes.
That was taken at the time of the opening, was it?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
was prior to opening night.
Yes.
Oh, this is a later
That'd be
picture
later.
It's a
of
later
just
picture,
before
but
they pulled it down.
That's
but
exactly as it was, though.
there were quite about all the stars. There was a lot of
Oh,
stars
yes, we
and
had
clouds.
stars
That's
in
really how
the
it finished.
ceiling.
Did the
That-
ceiling open on the Ambassadors, or you had the
Oh, no,
cloud
no,
projection?
no, it was a blue sky effect with stars. And every
Right.
lamp that shone down as a star had a thermostat button in it, not just to make and break with the heat, naturally, so it looked like stars.
So it looked like the open air,
That's
even
right.
though it wasn't.
That's right, and there was two little projectors on the side, one each side of the theatre itself, and that projected clouds,
Right.
which moved past one another.
And what was the opening movie, the first night of the movie?
Glorious Betsy.
Glorious Betsy. We've got another picture of the Ambassadors. This would be the foyer, is that right?
Yeah, that's the foyer, and that's the Bridge of Sighs, which you can see across the
Right.
top there.
And this again was taken in
Over the top.
1928.
Oh, no, this
No,
was
this was
taken.
later.
Again, these are all taken just before the
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ambassadors
just
was
before it was
demolished.
demolished. We tried to get a record of the whole cinema, and there was quite a few pictures taken of it. And,
Right. Mr. Booth, you worked in the same era. What was your favourite theatre?
Oh, I think the Capitol. It was. I was transferred from Fremantle for the opening of Hoyts
Right.
at the Capitol. That was my first big show. I'd been out in the sticks before.
And you were projectionist on the opening night, were you?
I was a projectionist with Mr. Goodall. He was the chief projectionist.
Right.
I was the number two. That was my introduction to the big time, you might say. I've got a soft spot for it. It was,
It
a,
was a
beautiful theatre.
Huge old place, wasn't it? How many did
Oh,
it seat? Over
beautiful.
2,000?
2,300.
Yes,
That was
Just
in,
a few more than the Ambassador.
yes.
in later days. That was the scene of rock concerts and general productions rather than movies. Is that correct?
When Hoyts pulled out, I think that would be about 39. We had a 10-year lease. And in the meantime, in 1937, Hoyts opened the Plaza,
Right.
which was on the side of the old Majestic. Eric and I opened that, didn't we? And then they let the lease run out. I think we'd be about 39. And from then on, the ABC took it over and had the symphony concerts. And a lot of big legitimate shows came over too, Japanese shows, you know,
Right, yes.
cast of Japanese singers and things. And it did all kinds of work like that. It was, and then it was taken over as cinema again sometime during the war. But,
Fuller's Theatres
with-
took it
yeah,
over. then.
Columbia and
Yeah,
Warner's.
That's right, Casablanca and all
Yes. Warner's took it over, and then I think Columbia took it after
the...
them.
Yeah.
Mr. Booth, do you remember what the first movie was at the Capitol?
Yes, Common Clay.
Common Clay, and what was that one about, and who starred in that?
It had Constant Bennett and Lou Ayres as a star. It was a movie of Constant Bennett was a housemaid and Lou Ayres was the son of the boss. And there was a bit of a romance went on. I can't remember much about it. I was too busy with my work.
Too busy. And that was a talkie in those days, is that right?
Oh yes, it opened up at all.
Yeah.
Although the Capitol did open up as a silent house, independent.
Right.
But the sound was here by the time Hoyts took it over.
And who were some of your favourite film stars? Of the, say, the pre-war days?
The early ones?
Yes.
Oh, I know. I had a lot of favourites. I liked Norma Talmadge, didn't you?
Alyssa Landy.
Alyssa Landy, yes.
Yeah.
I liked Norma Talmadge. She was always, pretty good. And
June Caprice.
Well, that was the Fox's girlfriend, yes.
A bit more intrigue and
Oh,
mystery.
Gladys Brockwell.
Yes.
Show what things were like in Hollywood in those days. On the Fox lot, Gladys Brockwell worked 50 weeks of the year, and then she had a fortnight's holiday.
And Gladys
And
Brockwell was
grinding
one of the
out
big stars,
films
was
all the
she?
time.
Yes. She was a big name at the time.
A big name with Fox.
With
Yeah.
Fox,
Yeah, she was a dramatic actress.
Working 50 weeks of the year. How
Yeah.
many movies would you produce working like that in the 1 year?
Good God, they could keep one theatre going, couldn't they?
Yeah.
Every studio could keep a theatre going, one a week.
Really?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander, you started in 1939, just prior to the Second War. What was the effect of the war on the movies and the audiences in Perth?
Well, I think that as far as the audiences go, the theatres had never seen such business before, because there wasn't any nightclubs. The city was dead. You had to book approximately 3, 4, 5 weeks ahead to get into a theatre on Friday or Saturday nights. There was a popular community concert at the Ambassadors that used to be conducted by Elwyn Kurtz, and by 11 o'clock in the morning the concert started about 1:30 to 2 o'clock. Well, no, I'm sorry, it was a midday concert, and you just couldn't get in the theatre, which was nearly a 2,000-seater, 3 hours before the concert started. And this was the case with continuous sessions going all day from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. And
This was at the Plaza Theatre.
no, that was at the Ambassadors
Ambassadors, sorry,
Theatre that the concert was on. We still had stage shows. Had Sammy Sharp and his orchestra. Mostly the Ambassadors, right up till the closing years, had some sort of a live entertainment beforehand. And
They had the organ too for a long
Les Waldron on the Wurlitzer organ was a huge draw. I can remember working on Sunday nights at the Ambassadors when I was, my permanent place was at the Plaza, and Les Waldron was the musical director for Western Command. And he used to come in and say, I think I'll keep my fingers nimble for a while, Ken, on the organ. So I'd say, well, I'll give you a spotlight just before we start for an overture. And the place would fill up 2 hours before we started. As soon as the sound of the organ would drift out into Hay Street, it was just like a magnet. People just came from all over the place.
People were attracted just to the organ, not just the movies.
Well,
It was a
no,
whole-
the
it was a whole
movies
night.
the movies weren't so hot on the Sunday night. They were probably 5th, 6th, 7th release B-class movies those days, when the admission was a silver coin to go in on Sunday night.
Right.
Threepence downstairs, sixpence upstairs, for instance. But you must also remember that during the war, movies were a cheap type of entertainment in comparison to today. Your stalls were 1 and 2pence. Your best seats in the house would be 2 and 11. That's 30 cents, just
Right.
under 30 cents each in the evening.
It's a
You've
bit
got-
different nowadays.
Mm.
And Mr. Nicholls, what changes have you noticed in projection equipment from when you first started?
Oh, there's quite a change. Ken and I both experienced the 70mm, and Ken and Mr. Alexander. That was a big change. But then at one stage we had 3D. That was 2 projectors. You recall that? At the Ambassadors?
Yeah.
And we had to
When
see
was
them.
this? When was this 3D?
Oh,
3D, that came in...
there's a new one in town now, as you know.
That's
yes, that would be about...
in the early 50s, I think, wasn't it?
yeah, I think it would be.
Yes,
Yeah.
probably.
And that operated with 2 projectors.
Yeah, well, what you did, you linked the projectors.
Right.
They linked, the ones we worked on were linked mechanically, and you had to set the film on a certain frame on both, so that, well, for instance, there was a boxing scene on,
Yes.
and you had to keep the ropes level on both
Right.
projectors, because otherwise they'd wander. Recall that?
And you had the cardboard
Yeah.
glasses with the...
That was
Yeah.
quite a hassle, the glasses, wasn't
Yes,
it?
we
A
had
pair
2
for
different,
each.
you had to have 2 pair. And then the bio, the chap on the main machine, he had a left
Yeah, they had... those,
spectacle.
what do you call those glasses?
Polaroid.
Polaroids,
Yeah.
yes.
That's right.
Well, the left machine had a left Polaroid glass, and the chap on the other machine had the right. So that when you looked at, you could only see what you were projecting yourself,
Yeah.
not what your mate was doing on the other side.
How successful were these 3D movies?
Oh, they did
Oh, they were
that.
wonderful for a start, but the glasses were the thing that killed them.
Right.
Well,
People wouldn't be
gimmickry,
bothered
really,
putting on
really
glasses.
those days.
They were a novelty.
were a later sort of advance on the old audioscopics that came out
Yes.
in 1937.
Yes.
The
Had a red
audioscopics,
and
what were
green,
they?
didn't they?
Well, they were the similar thing, but they were a single projector with an image about 6 inches apart. I think it was a red and green
Yeah,
image.
they used to use a red and green.
They had a pair of cardboard glass with a red and green glass in,
They're
or
pretty
cellophane.
awful,
They were just a gimmick.
Yes.
And the 3D they had down the Capitol, that was, they were motor cells and motors, weren't they?
Yeah, they were electrically connected.
Have either of you gentlemen, any of you gentlemen, seen the latest 3D movie that's
No, we're talking about the one.
Yes. Have you heard any reports how would it compare with...
The press gave it a good rate. didn't
Oh,
it?
this is far in advance to the others. I was talking to the producer Greg Lynch that's releasing it, and it's just out of this world.
I
It's
believe
done with
so.
a single image now,
Yes.
and
I'd like to see it.
it's an aluminium screen that really gives you the effect. And of course, it's a huge screen of cinemascope ratio, and it must be really effective.
Right. Just getting back to the early projectors, when you first started in the industry, Mr. Nicholls, were they all electrically operated or...
Oh, no. No, I've still got a handle, in fact, of one, of a simplex projector. That just a foot for every turn, and then there was the Australs, and the other ones, there were 6 inches for each turn. You have
the
some
ornaments?
here in...
Yeah, and you had to
The ornaments?
stand there
Stand there, yeah.
for the duration of the movie
That's
and
right.
crank the...
And when I worked at, which was West Guildford then, Bassendean, had a 7,000-foot reel up on the wall, and you broke it off in 2,000-foot pieces and took the spool away and put another spool on. And when I worked out the Rosemount, we used to change the reel every 2,000 feet,
How long were 2,000 feet? What was the duration of that?
in approximately 18 minutes.
18 minutes.
Of course, it was an advantage too those days. If you had a full house and a big queue outside, you could always squeeze an extra session in by
Gotcha.
grinding it
Yeah.
through a little bit faster.
Yes.
I suppose that was done.
That did happen, I
Oh, yes.
believe. Yes.
Oh, I remember at Fremantle, we showed a film, a great film in say called Over the Hill. Do you remember?
Oh,
Mary
yes,
Carr?
yeah, Mary Carr.
And we were running those projectors 130 feet a minute, and they were photographed at 60. But
So you-
people were conditioned to the
Yes.
rapid movement.
And you were running them at twice the normal speed to get more showings in the one
Get
day.
more showings in one day.
Things in, yes. I never worked in the theatre with hand turning. I always had electric motors.
Right.
I thought the Majestic was modern.
Yeah.
Because you're younger.
Actually, I'm not.
We've discussed a bit, we've heard during the course of the interview so far, that the ambassadors and the capital held very large numbers of people. What was the average seating capacity of the early cinemas?
What, 600?
I suppose Majestic, if you remember, would be about 600 or 700.
I would have
think
gone
the
higher,
lady
actually, to
in,
1,000.
not the Majestic.
Oh, the later ones, yeah. I'm thinking
You're
of the
thinking Potts.
Plaza and Piccadilly and this.
Oh, the Plaza opened with 1,300. I think the Palladium and Perth only held about 800, wouldn't they?
Yes,
700?
or that'll be at the most.
And Prince of Wales was a big one.
Hmm?
Prince of Wales,
Prince of Wales
was
is a big one, because I remember for the Seahawk they said they got 3,000 in for that. That was a silent.
3,000 people into the one...
Yes, for the
That-
Seahawk.
Was that the capacity of the cinema,
Oh, it was-
or they just
No, they were overcrowded.
hung them from the rafters, as it
And they
were?
were sitting in the aisles, which
Yeah.
was against
Right.
the health laws, of
Yes.
course. But we used to have to crank the roof off on the Pavilion and the Palladium to...
Let them breathe.
In the night time, if it was a very nice night, well, you could leave it open all night, but in the
Right.
daytime, you crank it off at interval for a while. But then if it rained, you had to dash upstairs and widen it off with the windlass.
This was all before air conditioning came about.
Oh, yes.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yes.
So, if you didn't crank the windows, very, very stuffy. Crank the roof open, I should say.
Yeah.
And how was it done? Just a manual...
I mean, like a windlass driving
Yes.
a bucket out of a well. That's
Yeah.
similar, a bit
Little
larger.
noisy too, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
some of them had two handles, a double handle, but then, of course, you're often there on your own.
And this was all part and parcel of the projectionist work.
Uh,
Or the
That was
Spool
Spool
boy.
Boys
Spool
work.
boys.
Spool
work.
boys.
That's
Yeah,
what we got
assistant
off on
operator.
after job.
Right.
More than once I've opened the roof and taken the risk and gone home and wakened up in the middle of the night and it was raining.
Yes.
I'd duck up and
That's right, I can recall that. And you
You
ever
can
gone
imagine.
home and thought you've left something on?
oh yes,
And I reckon that if that happens, I reckon you've turned it off. You know,
invariably, yeah.
invariably you've turned it off.
Yeah.
But if you know,
Talking about Spool boys and some of the things they had to do, I believe there's an interesting story about Bruno's. Who'd like to
Oh.
enlighten us on that one?
you'd be able to.
Yeah, well,
You know,
there's
that's
one of our colleagues called Doug Anderson, actually, and he always had the nickname of Bruno, and
Bruno
he
the
can
bear.
go back and he tells some great stories about the early days, and he tells one particular one. I'm sure I couldn't tell it the way he does, but he was an assistant at the Palladium in Perth, and it was a they had a motor on the machines, obviously, at this time, because there was an operator there called Ock Rowe, who always had to be addressed as Mr. Rowe, who used to almost, I think, wear a bow tie, didn't he,
Yes.
Eric, to most of times when he came to work. And this particular day, he put a wrong reel on, and Mr. Rowe changed over the other machine, and up came the wrong part, and he questioned our friend Doug about what reel he had on, and he scratched his head and said, "I'm not sure," and with those few remarks, he chased him, and he chased him out of the operating box, down through the aisle of the theatre full of people, up onto the stage behind the screen where Doug was going to hide, and anyhow, Ockrow caught him, and he gave him one hell of a thrashing. And he said, "Well, young fella, you can come back in the box in about 1 hour if you've learned a lesson." So after about 1 hour, Doug says he timidly went back to the operating box door and knock, knock, "Can I come in now, Mr. Rowe?" And he came out and said, "Well, I'm sure if you've learnt your lesson, young fella, I'll let you come back in." Well, that was the type of apprenticeship that these young fellows did.
And that, the big chase, that went on while the movie was showing.
Oh yes,
Most of
with
the
a
people-
theatre full of people, down one aisle, round the bottom, and onto the stage behind the screen.
Took a
And,
risk, you know, because they never had non-film film in those
No.
days.
Yeah.
Yes.
And those sort of incidents where the Spool boys were virtually slave labour
Yes.
for the task to do, that was common, was it?
The operator was a big man.
Well, I
wasn't
don't
he?
think, well, certainly they weren't treated like that. They were
No.
lunch boys, and
In the early days, the operators
but,
were much different when I was
they were
looking after
strict,
you.
sort
Eric
of-
and I were the new generation.
yes, they
those
were,
operators-
as Mr. Rowe we were talking about. Obviously, he was sort of a
Trev
tyrant.
Palmer was
but,
another one hard to get on with.
Yes.
And you mentioned the risk with the inflammable film there.
Mm.
Were there many fires caused by this flammable film in Perth?
Yes, they'd run at the Capitol, didn't they?
there was a lot of near
A lot
misses.
of near misses.
Yeah.
What was the cause of them? Smoking in the...
No,
no.
the projector stopped.
Right.
And
Film
the-
break, perhaps.
perhaps if the projector stopped and the safety shutter never came down, of course the arc, the intense heat of the arc, and if they've got a sort of a trap, a film trap above and below, well, if it gets beyond that, it gets to the reel. But usually the trap stops it, so you only burn perhaps a foot.
A foot, yeah.
There was nothing you could do about it once the reel caught a light. It was
No, once
just a
I got in the
matter of
Spool case,
history.
that was the end.
Yes.
Yeah, the beauty down the Capitol and half shots of sunrise.
Yes.
Yeah,
They lost
Lost
the
the
reel,
reel.
only a small reel, but they lost
they're
it.
running it on 1,000-foot reels like
Say
that.
a small fire.
It's only a small...
2,000 people inside.
I recall one incident
They
in
ran the film for
Ireland.
the rest of the run without the reel, you know.
They did?
Nobody missed it.
No, nobody missed it over there. You remember Len Martin? He used to be in the movies.
Yeah.
Well, he was running a show out at Maylands, and first of all, his resistance went on him, and he went out and he cut a bit of wire off a fence. It was AC, but he burnt 2,000 feet of film, and he ran out in the sand, and he threw the sand all over this film,
Right.
and burnt his chest, but he had no chance of putting it out because it was exploding out the side.
That's right, yes.
And he got pretty badly burnt, Len.
Mm.
You mentioned the cinema there at Maylands. I remember, well, there's still the Carney Hall in Guildford,
Yeah.
and the renown, the building is still there in Midland.
Oh, yes.
Were there many suburban cinemas in those days?
Oh, yeah, quite
Gosh,
a few.
there would have been well over 40. The Saturday morning paper and the film page used to be just full up with theatres. You could name them off one after the other. They got to the stage where you weren't allowed to build a picture gardens or a theatre closer than a mile apart as the crow flies,
that's
wasn't
right,
it? So that'll give you an idea
Of just
Yeah.
how
Around
common they
terrace.
were.
Yeah.
just how common they were. Yeah.
And the
Picture gardens.
picture gardens.
Oh, they were magnificent.
You've got a
At,
picture of ours.
Well, yeah, Eric used to run a picture gardens
so-
down South Fremantle, and we've just got some pictures for the archive part that I'm working on to try and get together on pictures of these old theatre gardens, theatres and projectors and that, and they were really something, the gardens. And of course, they took the place of air conditioning.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's not many pictures of gardens now, is
No,
there?
there's not many at all.
We were at Carlisle and we took a rather good one. Very fortunate. I took a picture of Jack.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
And Len and Ken,
Yes.
made it up for us.
Right.
Made a good job of it.
Well, I got a few of the villagey one,
Have you?
which Ken's got.
Oh, good.
Mr. Nicholls, over the years, what have been some of your favourite film stars?
Oh, gee, you've got me. I can always think of the original one at the Ambassadors, which was, the original talkie, I should say there, was The Wolf of Wall Street. And the star in that, I always look forward to his films, but he was no great good looker, was he?
Yeah, rugged, very rugged type.
What's his name again?
This was the movie that was on at the opening night at the Ambassadors.
No, not opening night,
No.
opening movie, opening talkie.
Opening talkie.
Yes,
George
George
Ban-
Bancroft.
George Bancroft.
I just
Yeah,
thought
it was a film about the Wall Street, about the bulls and bears, you know,
Right.
and
on the stock market.
the stock market, yes. And it was very interesting, and I think I remember that most of all because it was the first talkie there,
Yeah.
and the first talkie that I actually ran.
I think the Usherettes were the best film actresses, actually, better than the ones on the screen.
Yeah, very true.
What were some of the duties of the Usherettes in the early days? Have they changed much?
Well, no, that was almost a career job, I
Yes.
think, the years that we were in the business. We had, how many would we have had at the Plaza? 18 or 20
Yeah,
Usherettes.
14 hand-picked maidens, as Kakakoti used to
And,
say.
it's amazing now the theatres are run for economy purposes with only one or two people in there, but we had sound monitors, usherette sitting there just checking sound levels all through the performance.
Each aisle had its own usherette.
There was a huge staff of them.
You would have 18 Usherettes
Yeah.
for the one showing.
Yeah, possibly, I think, at the Plaza, with the usherettes and the staff and everyone there, we would have probably had a staff of, 40 people overall by the time you go through firemen and commissionaires and cleaners. And that's another point, the commissionaires, that Eric and Ken remember them perhaps more vividly than I do, but I do remember Alwyn Kurtz as the commissionaire at the Ambassadors, the Bishop of Blair, he used to be called.
Mr.
It was
Booth,
very good too.
Mr. Booth, perhaps you could tell us a bit about the role of the commissionaires in the movies.
I don't know very much about them because that wasn't my department. Every theatre had one.
Remember
Right.
the uniform? That was the thing.
And
They used
so
to look
usually
like
done
an
up like
admiral of
an
the
air
fleet.
vice marshal or a field marshal, and a good strong voice, and they would parade up and down the front and extol the virtues of the show inside. And
They would
tell
work
people
out on the
to come in.
footpath, would they?
On the
Yes,
footpath.
anywhere.
Spooking. They were
spooking.
spookers,
Yeah.
really. Just going through.
Commissionaires.
Well, yes. Well, of course, the better class theatres called them commissionaires,
Yes,
but the
right.
others were
At the
spookers.
Pavilion we had one chap, and Cleary used to have a fruit barrow in
Right.
Hay Street, outside where the Wesley Church is now, and the Wesley Church was there then, of course. And his name was Cleary, and he got a job at the Pavilion, and I recall once he's saying she was only married 3 months and she threw the baby at him, and I can always remember him saying that, and that might be a slight exaggeration, but that, and then they had a big placard out front, "Hop in, it's good." So we used to hop in on 1 foot just for fun. Old Georgie Turner was the manager then.
Oh, yeah. He was at the Palladium of Fremantle.
Yes,
He was a character, really.
yes. He had an old Maxwell car, and it used to be risen high at the back.
Right.
And the engine was heavier than the back, of course, and it was a coupe type thing.
Yes.
And he had rocks in the back to keep it down in the boot. And old Jimmy Rice had a similar thing, except that he had about 10 batteries in series parallels.
Mr. Alexander, you're currently working on some archives of the Perth cinemas, theatres in the early days. Could you perhaps tell us a bit about this?
Yes, well, for the last, I suppose, 5 or 6 years now, we've been collecting and restoring projection equipment from all parts of the state. We've got projectors from about 1900. They're fully workable. We're restoring them to a workable condition, and we go through, I think at the moment we've got 5 or 6 that are just unfinished. Some of the names that these fellows have been talking about, the Australs and the Benbows, the De Vrys, these will eventually finish up in a museum, together with a lot of paraphernalia like early arc lamps, early spotlights, and we're also recording a history of the cinema industry with photographs that we're getting through the Cinema Pioneers, and I hope that within the not too distant future we may be able to come out with a book of perhaps 100 or 200, perhaps 10 by 8, 8 by 6 photographs of the early cinema industry of Western Australia. And up to now, no one's sort of bothered to do much about this, and it's getting away from us, but I think we're going to catch up with it now.
You're still working on it. The projectors that you have restored, they range from the early hand-cranked ones right the way up?
Yes, we've got a particularly nice Powers machine which goes back to what, from 1912 onward, that hand crank one, I think, and it's a glorious looking machine, and it would still put film through it, and it's got the old oxygen and ether lamp in it before the arc lamp, and we can use that, and it's a particularly nice machine.
What size film could you put through it? What was the capacity?
There are 2,000 foot magazines on it, and they're pretty well limitless to what today's machines are, with the modern operating boxes that are about these days, where you can double up reels.
And these were what, 35 mil?
Yeah, 35 millimetre machines. And
that was a standard from the early days, or what was the size of the film?
Well, it's always been 35 millimetre. There are a host of film gauges. There's a lot of them. One that's not particularly well known is the 28 millimetre, which was a commercial film, but I believe this was European origin, although a lot was shot in Australia. The Australian Film Archives have about 40,000 feet of it, which our studio very shortly is going to put on the 16 millimetre for them.
Do you know whether that was shown in Western Australia at all? Or?
Oh yes, it would have been.
Yes.
It must have been, because it was, quite big movies that came over. So, but it wasn't a very popular gauge.
Yes.
There's pages and pages of different film gauges that never stayed with us.
Currently, all the commercial films operate on 70 millimetre. When did the conversion from the 35 mil gauge to the 70 mil take place?
Well, it's not exactly a regular thing, the 70 millimetre, mainly because of transportation costs. You get a reel of 70 millimetre, it must weigh well over 60 pound or 30 kilograms, wouldn't it? And to transport a movie, say like if you had, a print of Gone with the Wind came over on 70 millimetre, there was 20 odd reels in Gone with the Wind, about 26,000 feet. You needed a car and a trailer to take the film from the film exchange to your theatre. Where 35 millimetre you take it there in say 3 trunks, you get down to 16 millimetre, you take it round in one square case, then you get down to the 8 millimetre with a magnetic track and you can put it in your handbag. So this is basically, again, economy reasons. But what year was it? I think you'd know better. Where South Pacific was the first 70
about
millimetre.
1960.
1960, South Pacific.
You opened that?
Yes, I opened that. I was fortunate enough to have the first 70 mil. But I'll tell you what we do with the cinema pioneers. Is something we didn't acquaint you with, or I should have. When we meet and have these meetings, we're invited to bring along anything from the old days, or anything that's nobody's seen before or would like to remember. We bring cuttings and all that sort of thing.
Right.
Pieces of machinery.
And what are some of the more interesting items that get taken along to that?
Well, mostly they're programs from perhaps another part of the world, or they might be from Sydney or Melbourne, or they might have taken place a long time ago and been going through their cases and they find it.
Yes.
I had a case in point not so long ago, so I took it in.
Yeah.
I've got some film I bought in Tokyo when I was in Japan, and I took that in. That was very interesting.
Yes.
It was 35 mil, but it was a little bit different in as much as when you look through a viewfinder, it gave you a third-dimensional effect.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, Mr. Nicholls, what is your opinion of the new cinemas in Perth today? The cinemas today seat about 300, 350, the smaller ones, and we've got Cinema City, which is the complex of 4 cinemas together. What is your impression?
Oh, I'm very impressed. I've seen it in some parts of the world, and I've seen the Sydney one, which compare most favourably, don't you think?
This is
in the world.
Sydney's equivalent of our Cinema City.
Yes, the one in George Street.
How many cinemas in that complex?
5, I think.
7 or
7.
7. 7, that's right.
And is it a central control room?
Yes,
For
central control.
5 cinemas, and 2 are in another control area there.
Yeah.
And
The first of the multis was the Melbourne one, wasn't it?
Melbourne, yes, I went to that to saw Midnight Cowboy there.
Well, on the
Well,
monitor
both
now,
such
we've got
projects.
Cinema City today, and that's a view of the control room.
Well, that's as good as anything in the world, in my opinion. What do you think?
What's that, Eric?
Yes,
Cinema
well,
City. Wow.
You know, I've never been there. I've never seen a show there.
Well,
Mr. Alexander, could you perhaps explain to us a bit about what we're seeing there?
well, you're looking at an operating box that, again, it only occupies 2 or 3 projectionists to run 4 cinemas. You see the big, on the right, there's the big flatbeds where the whole program is
Platter.
a platter, that's right. Put on one spool, it comes off one, goes through your projector, winds onto the other. If, for instance, they wanted to show the same program in 2 cinemas, they would just loop it from one machine across to the other back on the platter. Then you've got xenon lamps instead of light source instead of the arc lamps, which gives you continuous burning. You can't sort of run platters on arc lamps successfully because of the length of burning time, which is probably 1 hour.
We've got a close-up on the monitor now of, that's a platter there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the platter with the whole film program laying on it. And these machines in Cinema City, I think we're probably, I don't know whether we're more automated than the Sydney one, but they take over the whole performance. They're programmed with a set of diodes to whatever function you want and when you want it to happen. And they're quite uncanny to stand there and you see your machine start up, your lights dim, the shutter opens on the screen, your volume comes up, your xenon lamp comes off standby to full power, and when interval comes, it guides them through interval. It even changes the lens from CinemaScope to standard.
So it's totally automated, and
Totally.
you don't even have to start it. It can
No.
be pre-programmed to start
That's right.
itself.
The whole thing. And the
They've got one on. They got one on a mobile one too, haven't they, at Cinema City?
Yes,
one that can move from-
just in case something happens, you
Right.
can push another one in, and the equipment there is never turned off. It's on 24 hours continuously. For a simple reason, from the reasons they say there's less chance of troubles by leaving it running like that. But I don't know, it seems to get away from the old smell of the grease paint, the smell of the nitrate film, and the chances of putting on wrong reels and things like that were always, a little bit of a
Well, like
hazard. And
nightmares.
I
There's
don't
another thing
know.
about them too. It's only one machine for each theatre, and where if it goes on the ice, if you've got a mobile one that you can put in its place, but under normal circumstances, if something happens to it, well, you've got no show.
That's right.
Whereas with 2 projectors, as in the old days, you can get by with one until you got the other
Right,
one
that's
repaired.
The old days of Russian roulette, I think, was a lot more interesting than just standing there watching it.
Well, we heard how
Most
before
installation here is programmed the same as you with the diodes.
Oh, yes.
we heard how before that there was up to 40 people working in a cinema. How many people would be working in the control room at Cinema City?
Well, there's 3 projectionists on each shift now, and
That's for the 4 cinemas.
Yeah.
that's for the 4 cinemas. I've often spoken to the boys and said, gee, you talk about the old days, you don't know what it was like, really. We used to work in a pair of shorts, and it used to be like a stoker's hole on a ship, didn't it?
Very often, yeah.
Ambassador's box on a summer evening after the day, it would go up to perhaps 115, 118 degrees. Now they've got air conditioning, showers, electric fry pans, toilets, a lounge suite to sit on. It's just incredible, the difference. It's automation. And
So it's not really a modern-day projectionist as an entirely different job to the job that you gentlemen would have performed in the past.
No, it's quite different to then.
Would that be right?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely, because you had a
Well,
lot of
the
improvising, didn't
Yes.
we?
Yeah, I had a lot of improvising.
Yeah, not
Like-
now. It's all programmed.
Well, there must have been some good old times, and before we came on today, I heard a few funny stories.
Yes.
Mr. Booth, perhaps you'd give us some of your favourite stories.
Funny ones?
Funny ones, yeah. Or whatever. I mean, things have changed a lot. What's probably some of the most outstanding things in your memory?
I think that one of them, between perhaps the pair of us, was when we were showing Sun Valley Serenade at the old
Skating
plaza, and we had Charlie Chan on to support, and those days during the war, the reels only had Fox films, Reel
I was
1,
away
Fox
for
Reel
5 years
2.
from there.
They didn't have a title on the leader, and we changed over in the middle of Charlie Chan, and smack Sonjahini goes skating across the ice, and the
I wasn't there
other reel.
that
I
day.
thought you were on with me that
No,
day
no, I
because
wasn't
I
there.
thought I got my ears boxed.
I was there the day that I myself put a reel of Topper in the middle of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Topper was we had a two-feature program. The first was a Topper, a very popular series about some kind of a apparition used to come around.
Yes.
Well, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs were going along nicely, and we changed over, and here was Topper in the middle of it. I got hauled over the college for that.
Was that a common occurrence?
No,
No, it was
no. Pretty
more the
rare,
exception.
yeah.
Than,
Yes.
yes.
Another thing too, in the very early disc days, you know, we had a big 16-inch
Yes.
select disc of the same grooves as 78. Really.
Right.
Used to laugh 11 minutes. When at the Capitol, in the first couple of weeks, the sound engineer came up for a check, and he bumped the damned
Pick up.
the turntable.
Yeah.
And pickup jumped the groove. Luckily, it was a little music short, but dancing and singing, and I looked at it and I thought, well, can I get away with that? You know, the singing and the movements weren't synchronised, and I let it go. And Sam Aiken was in charge then. About 10 minutes after I'd got off that reel and on, and he said, "You better come down to the office," which I did. And I didn't like to say the turntable had been bumped because this chap denied it. Well, I know he bumped it. So I just had to say, I don't know, a bit of dirt on the record or some damn thing. I let it go because I thought I could get away with it. And he said, well, as a matter of fact, no one's complained. I got a report from the Monitor. you
Oh,
know.
yes, they used to report.
So he said, you did get away with it. They were nerve-wracking, those discs, you know.
Sometimes a gunshot
Yes.
would make a jump.
Yes, a heavy,
Right.
a heavy recording.
Yes.
Pauline Frederick and Madam X at the Capitol, they had never had very good turntables, you remember?
Yeah.
And every time she fired the pistol, you go out of sync.
Mr. Nicholls, we've heard your recollections of the Ambassadors on opening night, and do you think today's cinemas, the modern cinemas, are as pleasing as the older ones were?
No, I don't think there's a romance about them.
There's
There
no
was then.
That's
Not
right.
amongst the people. You know, you see the people come in. Now we've got a picture here of a chap who used to run the suites there. The suites were not sold by the theatres, they were contracted, the same
Right.
as the cleaning was contracted. Well, the people would come and they'd buy chocolates, you know, and they'd dress.
It was more of a night out, perhaps?
Yes.
The
Irrespective of what was on,
atmosphere
they
was
came.
there.
They
Right.
came to the movies, irrespective of what was on.
Mr. Alexander, where do you see the movies in Perth going? Or the movie industry in general?
Well,
Cinemas and theatres?
There's certainly a future for it, and I think there's a good future for it. The whole concept of the earlier days have changed. The quality of the movies perhaps have also got so much better, but
Oh, yes.
but they did, you know, for the period that we were talking about, the movies were good. They were escapist movies, and
Yes.
I think one of your big changes is going to be in drive-ins.
In drive-ins, where do you see the changes coming there?
Well, I think in the not too far distant future you'll see multiple screen drive-ins come into, once again for economy purposes, and
You've
Could you-
already got them in the Eastern States?
yes.
Yes.
Perhaps explain to us how that works.
Well, there'll be a common operating box with an automated equipment in it, and I believe that there could be as many as 4 screens in the one in each corner of the drive-in, and I don't think they're very far away at the moment, and they will be run by one projectionist, the 4 screens.
And showing 4 different movies.
Yes.
Do we have the movies available for that?
Oh yes, yes. There seems to be an unlimited supply of movies. They just can't get the products through the existing theatres at the moment with the long runs.
Right.
That's another thing, a modern phenomenon, is the long runs. In the early days, a week was the maximum, wasn't it?
Yes.
And anything that ran more than a week was really an epic.
Yes.
Of course, now
Well,
we have a picture
sometimes
that runs
along-
for a year or more.
Yeah. Well, sometimes one due to go on for a week, it becomes an embarrassment. They've got to keep it on because it's getting the people in.
That's right. If
Right.
they have it a take-off figure, you know, if it took a certain amount of money, it would have to go for a further week.
Yes.
You remember poor old Irma LaJuice?
Irma LaJuice
Yes,
was the
that was
case in
the
point.
case. They were waiting to put Cleopatra on at the Plaza, and Irma LaJuice was such a success. They couldn't get it off.
Yes.
Over 36 weeks, and the Cleopatra was losing its its appeal and its novelty and its publicity drifting back. Finally got it on. I tell you, going back, I think the landmarks in the film business, and I think you'll agree, Eric, from the silent films, then we got sound, which was big, you know, and nerve-wracking. And then CinemaScope, I suppose, would be the next big thing, wouldn't it? And then we go to 70 mil, and now the wheels turned again. The wheels turned again, and we've got 3D again.
Okay, well, it's almost time for us to go. Before we go, Mr. Alexander, you've got a story for us, have you? Or a comment on the future?
No, I think we'll keep the stories for the future. I think my memory's just got the last two, and that's about it.
Okay. Well, on behalf of all of us here, Mr. Eric Nicholls, Mr. Ken Booth, Mr. Ken Alexander, well, thank you for watching and sharing with us reminiscences on the early days and not so early days of the West Australian film industry.